subscribe to Reddit Horror for more videos.
I'm a ranger in the Canadian wilds. A shadow has followed me through the forest. Lightning crackles dry in the distance above the mountains, in the midst of the swirling clouds. The snow falls. Perfect. About damned time too. Jackalopes, you understand, only mate during electrical storms. Clad in camouflage white, I hunker down at the edge of the snow-covered forest rough. Ahead lies an open plain of northern Canadian wilderness. This is where the jackalopes come through, in the storms. Fast as anything, they ain't easy bastards to catch. But catch one I must. My official title is Ranger, which technically speaking is a subdivision of the Canadian Armed Forces. I ain't a part of any squadron or station, however. You won't see me called to fight in any wars. No, my purpose is up here. The forest and the plains and the lakes and the wilds, they're my business. And my business today, to be specific, is the capture of a jackalope. A female jackalope, ideally. Well, nothing ideal about it to tell the truth. If I can't catch me a female, then the whole operation's a waste. This is my 4th day out here, laying low in the underbrush. I've packed food enough for 5, so I'm good for a while, but I've been waiting on this storm since the tail end of day 2. I'm a patient man, but it ain't safe this far out. And I'm not talking about the bears or the wolves neither. There's worse out here in these wastes and wilds, believe me. I'd rather not overstay my welcome. I squint through the walls of falling snow. Very little of my bare skin is exposed at present, but where it is, the wind feels sharp and cruel. The gale does, however, at least blow in a favorable direction. The jackalope's prime breeding ground is further on to the west, to my right, and that's the direction that the wind is blowing. The majority of the creatures will scamper from the left, and won't be able to pick up my scent on the gale as they do so. The wind carries the sound of their tramping and bounding feet. I hear them. They're on their way. So what's the deal? You're a skin. Why bother camp out in the miserable frozen wilderness for days on end for a single jackalope? Well, they ain't just rabbits with antlers, let me tell you. Their milk, for one thing, is magic. Not in the literal sense of the word, but the healing properties of the liquid are simply staggering. They can't be matched. And that's what I need from this trip. That's why I need a female. A female producing milk, at that. And since none of the jackalopes heading for the breeding grounds are going to be pregnant, that's likely to be easier said than done. You couldn't tell if you were looking through my eyes at this particular moment, but the plains have been carefully marked by dozens upon dozens of tiny holes in the ground. Dug by myself, of course. Lined with clay wet enough to mold but dry enough not to crack apart from the ice crystals when they freeze in the winds. I've dug the little holes, lined them with clay, and filled them up with whiskey. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Unless you're familiar with jackalopes, you'd think I was mad. Hell, it was hard enough sacrificing so much of the stuff, so much of my best stuff, damn it, but needs must. Needs must when the devil drives. And jackalopes love whiskey. It's addicting. It excites their palate in a rich and specific way, a way that can't be replicated by any of their natural surroundings. I need a jackalope milk, because my girl is deathly sick. That's the short of it. An injury tainted by an otherworldly poison, I'm pretty damned sure. The work of a shade, perhaps, or some cruel trick of the Wendigo, but regardless, she needs this healing. Lucy's her name. And she needs the milk of the jackalope, sooner rather than later. Here they come, now, bounding through the snow. Gray and thick with fur, antlers sharp and spiked. The second they see me, they'll all bolt in every which wise direction they can, so I only really get one shot per herd. The whiskey, if it works, will make 'em drowsy, which helps, but again, I need to time my sprints tactically if I want a chance of catching any more than one per attempt. So I wait. There must be at least 100 of the creatures passing me by right now, though it's difficult to count them in the current weather conditions. The lightning crackles again, and a few long seconds later the thunder rolls over the mountains, dulled a little by the great weight of the snow clouds. The snow is burying my chap holes. Less than ideal. But I stay steady. And none of the jackalopes stop. I remain hunkered for the better part of an hour. 1 hour of many such similar hours in a cold and terribly trying half-week. I grimace and clench my teeth in my jaw. Come on, I will, well aware of how foolish it is to will for such things, but willing all the same. One of you bastards, stop and taste the whiskey. Have a little drink on the way to your orgy. Indulge. And lo and behold, one of the critters does just that. It stops and does itself a little half-turn, then backs up to the snow-surrounded hole, sniffing excitedly. Drink, I project to the jackalope, and it does. It scooches forwards on its legs, and with its snuffling nose pushes aside the little banks of snow, squeezing its head into the hole to lap up the tantalizing whiskey inside. And hell, what do you know? Another jackalope a little further on does much the same, and I watch with a clenched fist and bright, flashing eyes as the critters drink their liquor. I'm well aware that jackalopes can't handle their drink. It'll hit quick and it'll hit hard. I give the creatures about 4 minutes, watching patiently, muscles tensed. Then I make a break for it. I ain't the youngest ranger out here in the wilds, not by a long shot. But I ain't no old-timer neither. And I'm faster than the lot of them, I'd warrant. That's not arrogance, you understand, just educated and light-hearted guesswork. A second after I've left the cover of the snow-drenched bushes, the wary jackalopes make their chaotic escape. As predicted, they squeal and trill and tear off into hiding at double speed, in every possible direction, calling out warnings to their brothers and sisters to fall back and to keep their merry distance. The jackalope engaged with the whiskey, however, the one closest to me, looks up with its reflexes dampened and eyes dozy. Its pupils narrow as it sees me. It sticks out a hasty paw and presses it into the snow, meaning to push off from the limb and bound desperately away. But I swoop down and grab it by the hind legs without breaking my step, crossing the snow plains with great leaps as I draw on jackalope number 2. This one looks up before I can reach it, then panics, stumbling and stepping right into the whiskey hole from which it was so eagerly drinking. Even with this unfortunate blunder, it still gets a head start on me. It tries to pick up speed on the thick and well-packed snow, but I throw myself across the plains and grab it by the tips of its back legs. I roll over and knock up a powdery layer of top snow in a great, dusty cloud, clutching the squirming jackalopes to my chest. Grunting through the pain of one, the antlers tearing through the sleeve of my jacket and nicking the skin of my arm. "Settle down, you bastards, man. Come on," I grunt to the creatures, sitting myself up and inspecting the first. They intermittently go stiff, death still, then scrabble madly around in their attempts for freedom, and it ain't easy checking for jackalope teats when you have one of the critters in either hand. I spend a good long look on the first one, using the thumb of my opposite hand to push aside its fur, but once I'm convinced it's a male, I let the poor bastard go. And after a brief stumble, it tears away after its fellows, disappearing into the snow. With a hand now free, my inspection of Jackalope 2 goes much quicker. I curse under my breath. Male, again. I allow myself a moment of frustration. No use crying about it. It is what it is. I let the jackalope go, and return hard-willed to my hunker-in bush, squinting through the snow as I walk. It'll be a while before they return now, I'd warrant. I settle down at my little encampment zone and haul off my gloves, making to sew the hole in my jacket whilst I have the chance. I get about halfway through before the shivering in my fingers makes the job an impossibility, and I decide to call it off for the time being. The gloves come back on, and I wait. I have myself a few strips of cold beef jerky, and sprinkle across it some salt from the vast quantities of packets in my pocket. It tastes miserable. Another long hour goes by before I see the jackalopes again, but the electrical storm rages in the distance, and whilst jackalopes they may be, they're still little more than big rabbits at their core. There are few animals horny. The breeding grounds call, and they cannot refuse the summons. This time a jackalope stops after about 5 minutes following the herd's reappearance. I watch it, brow creased and patient-steeled, as it stuffs its face in the whiskey hole and starts to feast. I risk waiting a little longer this time. 6 minutes instead of 4, then I burst from the bush and fly like an arrow across the surface of the snow. The jackalope's ear flickers upwards and it lifts its face to stare at me, but its reaction is just too little and too late. I skid down onto a knee and grab the creature by the hind legs as I do so, trying my best to calm it as it struggles and squeaks in panic. Once the jackalope is reduced to the occasional snort and frustrated twitch, I carefully push aside the fur on its stomach, steadily working my way down. And I allow myself a chuckle of triumph. This is a female. About damn time. She's ready for test 2. Now let me tell you, jackalope milking ain't the most pleasant of activities, so I'll spare you the details, but the short of it is that after about a minute, the creature produces a trickle of milk. And I am granted a welcome rush of relief. My quest is done, for the now. I take the creature back to my setup amongst the bushes, and with a little metal clink I draw out from my backpack 2 smallish steel canisters, and fill them up to the brim with the jackalope's milk. "Sorry girl," I murmur, "but it's going to good use, believe me." And when the second bottle is filled, I step back onto the plane and let the jackalope go, watching as she quivers, then darts away into the distance. The gray of her fur quickly lost to the white of the falling snow. I suppose it's time to return on home. It is in the throes of this success, this quiet glee, that I foolishly allow my wind to wander. My senses are scaled dangerously back as I put one foot in front of the other on my march through the wilds. Instead of considering my surroundings, as I have done solidly for the past 4 days, I instead permit myself a dream of my warm little cabin, out in the east and awaiting my return. And I think of Lucy. She'll be okay now. I'll be able to help her. I think of my fire, my chair. I begin to plan how I'll start replacing the sacrificed whiskey. The level of light is low. The thick snow clouds obscure the best of the sun's rays. It'll be about 3 hours until the sun sets entirely, and it'll take longer than that to return to my snowmobile. I didn't dare park it any closer. Large machinery scares off the jackalopes, and the creatures can smell the gasoline for miles and miles and miles. And vehicle tracks, well, tracks like that can be easily followed. I'm debating in my head whether to set up a camp whilst I have the light, or risk a return journey to the cabin, the entirety of which would be in the dark. I should be alright if nothing goes wrong on this hypothetical journey, but if there's an incident of any kind and I'm forced to stop, then I can't afford to be beginning a camp set up in the middle of an Arctic midnight storm. But if nothing does go wrong, then you'd be able to spend tonight in your bed, instead of a freezing tent. I bask in the mental heat of the imagined flames of the fire, and I am made a victim of the foolishness of my wandering mind. With a lurch, I find that my right boot has become stuck in the ground. I put out my arms for balance and try to bring my left foot over for a better stance, but find that it too has become stuck. And this is no natural snow stuck, you understand. This is a trap, and one that I recognize. I curse and lift my gaze at once, looking around for him. For the lair of the trap. For the Wendigo. To my right is the open and windswept snowy plains. Hills, and a great and ice-tipped lake lies beyond. To my left is the border of the forest, utilized to such success by myself, and now, by another. The Wendigo sits cross-legged on the trunk of a fallen pine, examining his nails as he whistles a tune through his frozen, torn, red-black lips. The wind recedes a little, and I am able to make out the notes. It's Where Have All the Cowboys Gone by Paula Cole. I've always hated that song. What do you want, Wendigo? I grunt to him as the snowfall slows. My heart beats hard and heavy in my chest beneath my jacket, but I keep my fear to myself. I allow it to resharpen my senses, but do my best to keep its cold, malicious fingers from my mind. My hand drops to my Browning pistol, hung at my waist, on the side that faces away from the Wendigo. Allow me to paint you a picture of his form. Imagine, if you would, a living corpse. One stretched beyond its means. The longer you look, the more you notice its flaws and its disturbing quirks. Limbs longer than they should be. Heels that come way too far up its legs. Blue-grayed skin pulled taut and tight across a skeleton too large for the body it supports. marked with blood sore red in splotches and irregular patches. His head houses two sunken but bright yellow eyes, and from the temples protrude two curled horns, like those of a twisted ram, only thinner and longer. The Wendigo rolls his tongue black and putrid, and the whistling fades into the words of the end of the song. Where is my Marlboro man? Where is his shiny gun? Where is my lonely ranger? Where have all the cowboys gone? Those lamp-like eyes flicker up from his nails and across to me, and I suppress that familiar wave of nausea as his gaze meets mine. His torn and ruined mouth stretches into a dark grin. Where have all the cowboys gone indeed? I'll ask again, Wendigo, what do you want? I call over to him. The Wendigo sighs and uncrosses his legs, leaning forwards to rest an elbow on his thigh and his chin on his hand. So wretchedly impolite, every time. My hand twitches by my gun, the pistol at my hip, not the rifle strapped to my back. There's no way that the Wendigo could have seen the movement, but he comments on it regardless. Steady that hand, Ranger. What are you going to do? Shoot me? I grab the weapon with a quick hand, and do just that. Teeth grit, I bring the pistol up and snap off the safety. Like a whip, the weapon is raised and two shots have been fired into the Wendigo's chest. Two loud bangs later, and black blood starts spurting from the wounds. With a gasp of deflation, the Wendigo collapses backwards off the trunk and into the snow, foot twitching. My feet, however, remain firmly stuck to the ground. The trap holds firm, and I watch with disappointment, though with little surprise, as the Wendigo, the real Wendigo, shimmies into sight down the trunk of a nearby tree. He jumps to the ground with a crunch of snow and scratches his chin with amusement at the corpse of his copy. He crouches down on those inhuman legs, and with a grunt he pushes the body of the imitation away, unceremoniously off of the trunk, so that he himself may sit down in its place. He inclines his head and puts out a hand of many fingers in a little gesture-like bow. Were you hiding in that tree the entire time? I ask him. Or did you appear there the moment I shot down your totem? Ah, the Wendigo replies with a grin, waggling his finger. Now that would spoil the trick, don't you think? If I shoot you again, will you appear from another tree? Like an ape? Are there dozens of your copies all waiting their turn? All up in the trees right now, at this very moment? Maybe I'll shoot you again and find out. The Wendigo's grin widens. I think not. You've had your chance. And you know how I feel about bullets. He snaps his fingers. The pistol in my hand becomes ever so subtly lighter, and I mutter another curse under my breath.
The bullets will be gone, and the gun'll be useless now anyway. I'll have to take it apart back at the cabin and put it back together again. I return it to my belt. And I'd keep that rifle on your back too, Ranger, unless you want to face the night with no weapon at all. I do have other, non-gun weapons at my disposal, but I keep my mouth shut, and my hands by my sides, for now. So then, Ranger, enough chit-chat. The Wendigo's voice drops an octave and he repeats his former pose. Chin in hand, forwards leaned towards me, a dark light on the snow-powdered wilds. He cocks his head and his eyes flash bright. How about you tell me what you've been doing, all the way out here?